Minister?
Well, at this stage we're estimating that the fire covered about 650 hectares in the Table Mountain National Park. When you go up in the helicopter, you can see that part of the mountain looks like the surface of the moon. All the vegetation is completely destroyed. There are other areas where trees are still smouldering, and we do still have crews responsible for the mop-up operation on the mountain. I think that the other thing that one realizes when one is up there is, vast and terrible as this devastation is, it could have been so much worse. And you can see a very clear line where the fire was stopped by our firefighters in the city bowl. And one really has to salute their incredible bravery. We heard today how frightening it was on that fire line. I think that we have to also pay tribute to their training and to their discipline, because obviously if you have 1,000 firefighters on a line and only 4 of them sustain minor injuries, it means that they are well prepared for the task and they are able to manage their fears and they're able to conduct themselves in a manner that deals with the problem appropriately.
Minister, just earlier on in the week we heard from the City of Cape Town's Fire and Rescue Service spokesperson saying that generally during the April time, Cape Town is usually experiencing a little bit of rain, autumn basically. However, we see ourselves in very hot and dry conditions. You spoke about preventative ways for the foreseeable future.
I think that what we all understand is what we're experiencing is the phenomena of climate change, and wildfires are part of the evidence that climate change is taking place. Of course, the fynbos biome would burn naturally, but the fact that we've had these very searing temperatures in April, that is what has led to the vegetation being very dried out, and obviously creates conducive conditions for runaway fires. We have last year as Cabinet passed the climate change adaptation strategy, and what that strategy says is that all levels of government have to develop adaptation strategies. Clearly, when we're adapting to climate change, many sectors are involved. Agriculture. What we're interested in here is the built environment. We have to be looking at how we make buildings more energy efficient, more water efficient, but also in biomes where there is a threat of wildfire. Obviously, we've also got to be looking at the issue of fireproofing those buildings. I haven't personally read the city's adaptation strategy. I know that it exists, and I know that all cities in our country are currently looking at how they mainstream those adaptation strategies into their IDP processes. And this is, as we are mitigating the effects of climate change, we've also got to be adapting to it, and this is an important area where we will have to have adaptive mechanisms.
Mitigating and adapting, Minister, but there is a man that is currently in custody facing charges of arson. You spoke earlier on about people that are homeless that have found or seek refuge at the slopes or at the bottom of Table Mountain and various mountains in Cape Town. How do we then adapt to that?
Well, let me say that my understanding is that this man is not accused of starting the primary fire. The primary fire that did most of the damage was on Hospital Bend. This was a secondary fire incident. But I think that when we look at the background to the situation we are facing, one of the issues that we have to look at is the conflict between human beings and the environment. And what we understand is that all cities face homeless people. It's a well-known fact that our country is an unequal country, and that we have people living in conditions of poverty and people who are living under extremely vulnerable conditions. And I suppose what that means is that as a park authority, we would obviously be removing unauthorized visitors on a regular basis. But the question remains, where do those unauthorized visitors go? And I suppose it's incumbent on all cities to have appropriate measures to deal with the homeless, shelters and so on and so forth. Because what we understand is that human beings are not waste. You can't just dump them by the side of the road.
And then, Minister, the 2 investigations that are currently underway to determine the cause of the fire.
Yes, there are 2 independent investigations currently underway. The first one would be the Sandparks investigation, and there is also an investigation by UCT. Obviously, the insurers of both institutions have requested those investigations, and the purpose of those investigations is to establish how did the fire start. Is anybody responsible? What are the liabilities? We're expecting that our own investigation will be complete in 2 weeks' time, and we should then get further guidance on the way forward.
And then, Minister, for obviously people of Cape Town and obviously other parts of South Africa during this hot, dry time, what can you say to them to mitigate the risks of starting fires that could ultimately cause extensive damage that we saw in the past week?
We're South Africans. We like a braai on a Sunday afternoon. What we've got to think about is how are we managing our braai in a socially responsible manner. And of course there are lots of different forms of braai equipment, and I think in a place that has high wind we need braai equipment with lids, and we may need to make sure that when the meat is cooked we put the fire out. So I think that if we work together in that way, we can reduce the possibility that an incident such as this will happen.
And then, Minister, in a place like this, like Newlands, where there's lots of trees, following this fire, has perhaps maybe environmental affairs or the various departments responsible taken a look at some of the trees that are in this community of some sort to mitigate the spread of fire?
Well, many of the trees here are historical trees. Some of them are 200 years old. They are protected by regulations of the City of Cape Town. Let's wait for the analysis of the causes of the blaze and so on in these investigations I spoke to you about. But of course, going forward, those kinds of conversations about whether with climate change, with the increasing risk of fire, what is the appropriate regulatory environment with regard to alien trees? I think that's something that will have to have consideration.
Lastly, Minister, before I let you go, the City of Cape Town is looking at axing over 200 firefighters. You spoke about the bravery, the fear, putting aside fear, and obviously containing this devastating fire, and having seen it from an aerial perspective. You touched on where the men and women were lined up containing that fire. But what are your thoughts following this devastating fire, the bravery that we saw playing out this past week, that now there's about over 200 that are facing suspension?
Let's allow the Mayor of Cape Town to answer the questions about his workforce. What I can say is that the firefighters that I met today are extremely brave men and women. They are people who, in the face of enormous difficulty, managed to conquer their personal fears. Bravery, as we know from our former president, is not about not feeling fear. It's about being able to conquer it when the time is right. And that obviously is a result of self-discipline, and it's a result of training. And I think that we owe our firefighters a great debt of gratitude. This fire, if they had not contained it, could have been considerably worse. And we must salute them, and we are in their debt.
Thank you so much. That is Minister Creecy there giving us an update following her overview regarding the fire, the extensive damage to biodiversity, also touching on the fact